Hello everybody. Today we're going to be looking at a Glenn Loury video. So Glenn Loury, for those of you who are unaware, is a PhD economist from, I think it's Brown. I don't know, I just looked at it but I forgot. So he has a video that recently came out where he's interviewed by Reason TV, notable libertarians. We're being swept we're being swept along by hysteria about racism in America. So I won't lie, at first I was like, you know what? It might be irresponsible to watch this without looking at it first. You know, Glenn Loury, he's got a PhD in economics. So, might require a little more legwork than just, looking at the video and seeing what you can do from shooting from the hip. But, scroll down a little bit. Actually, I did it the other day, but as I scroll down, I saw people saying, like, oh, look, a brave academic willing to quote Charles Murray, among other things. I'm like, okay, well, this ain't actually going to be that hard. So it's an hour fucking long somehow. So I don't think we're going to do the whole thing. I'm really just waiting for my watch to charge so I can go for a run. So let's get started on this fucking piece of shit.
Black Lives Matter and other groups arguing that
So my predictions are
systemic
we're going to see that slavery ended 150 years ago. A little spoiler from that. He mentions it in his letter here. I'm assuming that comes up. This letter is wonderful. I'm too lazy to do the letter. Videos seem more fun, so we'll do this.
racism is at the center of the African American experience in the contemporary United States. Loury also worries that our institutions are failing to affirm the primacy of reason over violence in calibrating our reactions to the supposed oppression, as he wrote in response to his school's public position on protests. The 72-year-old professor, the first African American to be granted.
That's a real interesting cherry pick from what he wrote, because he's like, this was clearly written by a committee of activists, and it's like, dude, they're just like, yeah, structural racism exists. Their letter was really no big deal. That racial domination, white supremacy define our national existence even now, a century and a half after the end of slavery. This is so fucking absurd. It's like, yeah, slavery ended 150 years ago, and then obviously we went right into Jim Crow laws, which only got rectified in 64, 65, whenever the Civil Rights Act was. And then we went right into mass incarceration, affectionately referred to as the new Jim Crow. So something tells me that, yeah, he's an idiot, or at the very least incredibly disingenuous.
Harvard's economics department talked with Reason via Zoom about how the U.S. has changed for the better over his lifetime, why understanding history is vital to social change, and whether rational discourse has any purchase left in social and political debates. Glenn Loury, thanks for talking to Reason.
Good to be with you, Nick.
So you are a critic of arguments that
look at these pieces of shit not wearing masks in the comfort of their own homes. Degenerate.
Systemic racism is the primary cause for problems facing Black America. And you recently told City Journal of the Manhattan Institute about policing in America. You said there is a problem, but I think its scale is exaggerated. And in the same interview, you commented on the killing of George Floyd, and you said that case is terrible and that there's really no kind of talking your way out of what people...
Oh, my other prediction, just because of this lead-in, is that a really fun thing I noticed of people who want to criticize the George Floyd protests was putting an over focus on the justification of any single killing. So the classic example would be someone like Michael Brown, whose killing sparked the Ferguson protests and other national protests in relation to the killing of Michael Brown. Hands up, don't shoot. Now, when the evidence was gone over, and they kind of sorted everything out, sorted through all the facts of that, Michael Brown was actually a justified shooting. Now, after that shooting occurred, there was a reckoning on the Ferguson Police Department. They found that there was systemic abuses by the Ferguson Police Department. This is a 100-page DOJ investigation into it. There's systemic abuses carried out by the Ferguson Police Department against the African American community in Ferguson, Missouri. The Michael Brown shooting was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was giving people a rallying cry to get behind a wide swath of issues that were then condensed along you're shooting innocent Black people. Now, they probably do use excessive force against Black people, and that does probably result in, I'm talking about Ferguson specifically, does probably result in more people dying on a per capita basis or in an unjustified manner of Black people compared to white people. A classic example of this would be the research that shows that doctors tend to not prescribe painkillers to Black people because they think they can withstand more pain, right? There's that that imagery of like the super predators back in like the Clintons in the '90s when they're passing like that crime bill, and even if you listen to, I almost just said Derek Chauvin, that's the recent one. When you listen to the cop who shot Michael Brown talking about him, he talks about how he's like this rogue gorilla. Like he uses this really like evocative rhetoric of like, oh, he's like overwhelmingly powerful. I was terrified. It's like, dude, like we get it. Like you shot him and it was a justified shooting, but he used very, shall we say, colorful language to describe Michael Brown and why he was so scared because he had this. I shot him and he kept coming. Like it's insane. Like he was battling literally the Incredible Hulk and like a fucking Missouri neighborhood. It was absurd. But that imagery goes into how police interact with these people, where you just perceive them as being like borderline superhumans. You know, like they're dealing with literally the X-Men when it comes to like engaging with black populations. So if that goes into the medical field, why would we think it wouldn't go into the police field as well? You know, in your perception of how these people interpret their ability to endure pain or their overwhelming black person strength. It's insane, but whatever.
See there. Can you disentangle those two statements a bit? One, which is that the case of George Floyd is terrible, and it's on display for everybody to see. And then also
see, here's what they're going to do here, and what they're already setting up for is they're going to condemn Derek Chauvin and the George Floyd killing, and they're going to say those police are fucked up, but everything else, it's fine. And these protests are ridiculous. And yes, they should be punished, but why are there protests everywhere else? And it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe we can look at the police protest responses where, like, they're tear-gassing protesters, like, or tear-gassing nonviolent protesters, or when, like, the president decided to, like, go do a photo op and then use tear gas to disperse protesters outside of the White House.
That there is a problem with policing and black communities in America, but it's been overstated.
Okay, so, I mean, I started with the observation that every one of these viral incidents comes to our attention because of the structure of information dissemination in the society. With these mobile phones and all of this video, with this networked, social media mediated, fever pitch tuned.
For the record, I don't know why this dude is staring at the ceiling right now on the left side. Like, dude, he's been operating like a podcast for like, I don't even know, like a year and a half, 5 years. I don't know. It was like the Blogging Heads thing that now moved over to the whatever the hell this Watson Institute shit is. Like, I don't know why he's staring at the moon while talking about this.
Hive of back and forth that goes on. So we know every single one of these incidents. You can name these names. These names are known to us. They number in the dozens or whatever. But it's a country of 330 million people. There are tens of thousands of encounters of variety of kinds that are ongoing. The determination that I will view my reality through the kind of hysterical reaction to legitimately troubling incidents, but they are relatively few in number and not characteristic of the day-to-day life of African Americans in the country.
Okay, so this sort of, I guess I elaborate on this a little bit. So what he's saying is technically correct. Is every single day black people getting murdered by the police? No, I think it's, what do we have? I think it was like 30 this year. I don't know the exact number off the top. I don't want to spread misinformation, but you probably have the tune of like hundreds of police-involved shootings with young African-American people, or African-American people in general, that happen in a given year. Now, what people like, the whole like purposeful obtuseness that you have to engage in to just look at this in a vacuum, right? Oh, this police shooting, blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, it was bad, but why is everyone so angry? We're in a country of 330 million people. Of course you got incidents like that, sure. But these incidents don't exist in isolation. They exist in systems that perpetuate this type of violence, right? So you can have like the classic example of like a stop and frisk in New York City, which was overly targeting minorities, and at its peak, it stopped like 700,000 people a year in a city of 10 million. So, like in that, it's like, oh, you should have like almost 10% of your population being stopped, like 7% of your population being stopped, but it's not quite how it worked out, right? That stop and frisk was targeted in certain areas. You didn't see any cops standing outside the fucking Bank of America building where all the bankers are coming out with fucking blow in their pockets. You didn't see cops stopping and frisking these people. No, they went to the minority communities and they stopped and they did that to them. There's this systemic terror of over-policing in certain areas where their lives are just hassled day in and day out. They're hit with like nuisance violations, like noise complaints, or like I should say jaywalking. At least not in New York City, they probably wouldn't get tagged for that. But every little fucking thing they do is over policed, you know. get bothered by the police. They're just walking down the street. They're gonna get stopped. They're gonna get frisked. Okay, you can go. Or like they find some minor nonsense. Like maybe they find a little bit of marijuana or like a bong or something, or not a bong, like a, I don't smoke marijuana, so they find some sort of marijuana smoking device, and they're like, oh, now we fuck you, you know? That's what they do because they want to boost up numbers, and they're put in these areas. Now, the police who are in those areas might not necessarily be bigoted. I was talking to a cop the other day who I mentioned, I'm like, yeah, but like, you tell me, he's a big motherfucker, like 6'6", like jacked, and he was telling me how he primarily patrolled a black area, and that when it came to stopping people, that he was rejecting systemic racism to begin with. And when it came to stopping people, he's like, listen, I was just, if you don't break the law, I'm not going to bother you. But like by virtue of putting you in those areas, you're going to find people who are breaking nonsense laws who you're bothering now, who, when you're in a predominantly white area, people who are doing the same thing aren't getting bothered, right? Like the classic data of like, stops against black people seem to like drop at, well, no, that wouldn't be a great one. I was like, racist stops of black people more so than white people seem to stop at night when it's hard to tell the difference between people, but that's more like actual racism or implicit bias, or, than it is like where we're patrolling. But I'm like, but you don't get it. Like, you're telling me systemic racism doesn't exist, but you're telling me the system puts you in an area where, like, the people you're stopping for crimes just happen to be black. And it's like, sure, but if you create things that are crimes, and then you only look in a certain area for those crimes, then it's only a crime in that area, and not in the other area. As a result, it's affecting one group more than the other. That's systemic racism. And it's just rather silly.
The question here is about race.
Or disingenuous. I would say it more functions as a defense mechanism where you can just say, like, I was just following orders, Like, I was just, don't break the law and I won't enforce the law. It's okay, well, what if the law is like being a Jew in public, Like, oh, you gotta wear your star in your armband. Like, come on now. It's like, it serves a defense mechanism to, like, the officer speaking to, because he doesn't have to say, like, I was helping or contributing to a system that was bad. Well, he was, but like he gets to pretend that he wasn't doing it, because in his head he could say, that's just the law. If you got a problem, address it with the laws. My job's just to enforce the laws. But we're like, yeah, but we're saying police is part of systemic racism. These two things can be true. You can just be doing your job, which I think is a shitty fucking excuse, but you could just be doing your job, and your job can be, marching Jews off to camps or overly harassing black people in a given community.
Do these incidents indicate something about the tenor of race relations? I'm still not entirely persuaded that these are racial incidents. I think the routine and habitual reporting of these incidents, characterizing them in terms of the race of the people who participate, presupposes a motive for action, which is, in almost all the cases, never established. We just presume that a white police officer is acting in some way against a quote-unquote black unarmed man because of their whiteness and blackness, respectively.
So it could have been a black police officer that did this, and I'm sure there would still be a degree of outrage, because that's insane. Like, you could talk to like black police officers, and most of them are also pretty shitty. I'm not saying the solution to policing in America is that we have black police officers who are stomping on black communities instead of white police officers stomping on black communities. I'm proposing that like we shouldn't stomp on black communities, right? That's the whole defund the police effort. It's send the right people to do the job, right? Oh, there's a drug overdose. Why are the police coming to like arrest people? That might not be a great example though, but if there's like a mental health issue or domestic disturbance, send like emergency response, like counselors, who are unarmed, and then you can have police on standby. That's a thing you can do, because more often than not, like, you just send some counselors to help like a couple going through a dispute, knocks on the door, say, hey, we're just counselors. We're here. We heard there's an issue. We want to see if we can help you talk through it. Like, that could just end there, and maybe it'll escalate to violence, and maybe some people will get hurt, but that doesn't mean you need to necessarily send the police. The police can exist as a backup. By walking into an incident with a gun, the police act as a natural escalation, because their mandate is like the capacity to use force to enact their goals, enact their policies. But not every situation calls for that, and by even having someone whose job is to use force, having them respond to literally everything is an escalation within that incident, right? So think about an example of like the police doing traffic stops. Let's say you're someone smuggling drugs, right? And the police stop you because they, see like a broken tail light, expired registration. Maybe you take out your gun, you hold it by your fucking window. As soon as the cop walks up, you blow his fucking brains out. because okay, he's gonna like see the drugs in my backseat, or see this or that or the other thing, and now there's an escalation there. But if you just have a force whose job it is to like stop cars for basic traffic violations, issue them a civil citation, and then like move on. They don't have guns. They don't have a mandate to find drugs. They don't care. They're not trained to do that. They're just non-sworn. They're not going to search your vehicle. They say, hey, here's your ticket for your registration. See you later. That drug dealer doesn't need to be worried about being, or drug trafficker doesn't need to be worried about being pulled over because it's a non-sworn person pulling them over, and therefore their car ain't going to get searched. So there's no reason for them to escalate violence with a police officer if that isn't going to happen. It's rather simple. But it's weird. It's like, oh, because I had a cop who would tell me, like, you know, when we do stops, like sometimes people get rambunctious, all this. It's like, yes, because you're bringing a gun to an incident that doesn't require a gun. And there's an inherent aggression involved in that. And, like, I've been pulled over enough to where, like, almost all the cops who've ever pulled me over have been dickheads from the fucking get-go. So, yeah, you're being a dickhead. You're introducing hostility. They give you orders. I was searched on the side of the road because I gave cop attitude. Because, like, he was questioning me about some dumb shit when I wasn't the driver. And I'm like, why are you talking to me, buddy? And then he, like, searches me on the side of, like, a major highway. And it's like, okay, man, like, whatever. And I'm like, fucking white dude, you know? If it's happened to me and I'm a white dude, it's probably worse if you're a fucking black dude, you know? I can get away with giving a cop some fucking attitude. Jesus Christ, I'm not making progress on this video. We're 4 minutes in. He just said so many stupid things, though. That's just, like, devoid of, like, a holistic understanding of what these protests are, and he's just trying to like abstract them to just like, oh, is there like an epidemic of people being murdered by the police? It's like, well, yeah, our police are overly violent. Is that specifically racialized? No, but our enforcement mechanisms in a given city generally are. Like, you don't have to go very far back to find stop and frisk being ruled unconstitutional, and that practice ending in New York City after overly targeting minorities. And then like there's a clip of Bloomberg saying like, I think we need to target more minorities. Like, there's like the mayor of the biggest city in America, okay, literally saying we need to target more minorities. And, you know, the liberal bastion of New York, if it's that bad there, where else is it going to be shitty?
How to really stop and think about that imputation, think about that presupposition. As I've tried to indicate in some of my commentary, there's a lot of, quote, black crime. Close, but I'm not talking about black on black crime. I'm just talking about black people breaking the law. There's a lot of it. Do we want to dwell on the fact that they're black?
We talk about race in America.
Okay, once again, if I make it a crime to possess a drug or to do a given activity, and then I only look in one area that happens to be mostly black, pure coincidence, if I only look in that area for the offense, then yeah, that's where I'm going to find the fucking offense, right? And then there's that, like, okay, let's say I have $100 to spend on policing in a given year, and I allocate like 60% to the black community, 40% to the white community. And then after a year, it's like, oh, I found 50% more crime in the black community. Well, yeah, you put 50% more resources there. That's where you found it. And then you're like, oh, there's an epidemic there. And then you just put more resources there. And then because you put more resources, you find more crime. And maybe as a result of that, you even take away resources from the white community and allocate it there. And then now we see, man, the crime rate's dropping in the white community, and it's just increasing in the black community. But it's not that the crime rate is changing, particularly for things like drug use, because like black and white people have comparable rates of usage. It's that you're just putting resources in the area with the black people. That's why you're finding black people doing it. Like, ugh, come on. And like that could be a non-racist, just like that could be non-racist after it's implemented, but there is certain racial implementation of it. Like there's the whole there's a Nixon advisor who said like our two fucking enemies here are anti-war hippies and black civil rights leaders. So we made marijuana illegal so we could target the hippies, and we made like crack or whatever illegal so we could target black people. I'm pretty sure those are the two drugs he named. It might have been hallucinogens or hippies. I don't recall. I'll see if I can pull it up real quick. Nixon advisor targeted. Eloquent explains anti-left. Let's see. Where's the quote? You want to know what this is really all about? Eloquent asked, referring to the war on drugs. Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. there you fucking go. That's a high up Nixon advisor who literally gave you this fucking quote explaining exactly why they criminalize these groups to target black people and to target hippies. The great thing about being a fucking hippie, you can just stop being a hippie, you know? Just stop smoking the weed and like you'll just blend into the rest of the white people. My mom's a great example of that. She was like a fucking hippie in the 70s and now she's like, she voted for Trump in 2016, you know? Like all you have to do is stop doing that. But guess what? You can't just turn off your skin color there, buddy.
America, I mean, going back to the founding, because blacks and whites, you know, and early on it was whites who wanted to talk about race and kind of.
And yeah, so specifically when you craft a law to find like black people, to like target black people. Oh, also I just realized this is right here. He's also like like values Thomas Sowell's opinion. It's like, okay, man, just you're just one of those. That's why I didn't bother doing background research because I'm like, oh, this can be basic as fuck.
But we don't talk honestly about it. I mean, consider. So we talk about these viral incidents like George Floyd. Now, in many of these encounters, they say he was only trying to pass a $20 bill and he got 911 called in. Eric Garner was only selling loose cigarettes out in front of a convenience store. Michael Brown was only, and it's not supposed to even be relevant, strong-arming a packet of cigarillos, etc., etc. In so many of these instances.
So what he's kind of getting at here is the whole they had it coming, but with the exception of Michael Brown in that, which I kind of went over earlier, like that seemed like it was in a vacuum a justified use of police violence. There's more to that. I'm not saying that shooting needed to happen. I'm saying that within the context of when he fired the shots, it was a justified police shooting. Now the force applied to Eric Garner and George Floyd are clearly not fucking justified. And spoiler alert, selling loose cigarettes, which I don't even think Eric Garner was doing. He was known for selling loose cigarettes and had loose cigarettes on him, but like he came to the attention of the police because he broke up a fight, if I remember correctly. I gotta look into that because I had that argument recently with someone. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it was this. And they're like, I'm pretty sure it was that. I'm like, I don't think he was literally selling loose cigarettes at that time, but he had done it in the past. But yeah, like the penalty isn't for this is like Judge Dredd comes down and like judge, jury, and execution is your ass on like the fucking on a street corner in Staten Island. Like that's never how this went down. Like it's like, yeah, you get like a fine for this shit. You know, you don't get like put in a chokehold until you can't breathe, then you just fucking die at the hands of the police. Like that was never a penalty as codified by law.
Is resisting and attacking the police officer. The police officer's use of force may be disproportionate. True enough, but can it be irrelevant?
Yeah, so police are people who are ostensibly trained to handle high-pressure situations, who are supposed to go out there where people are going to be aggressive, they're going to be angry to see them. They don't deal with the police as much as the police deal with the public, right? That's their fucking job. The police deal with this. They're supposed to bring reason and calm and the ability to act in what's it called? Crisis situations or like hostile situations. They're supposed to be able to think reasonably through that and apply adequate levels of force. So you're like, oh, you know, they got violent. It's like, yes, their training is literally supposed to cover this. And if your training doesn't allow you to act even-handedly and act rationally in a given and apply adequate levels of force in a situation, then like your training either failed or you can't be a police officer. It's that simple. Just saying like, oh, you know, like, yeah, they use too much force, but let's not forget the guy committed a crime. It's like, yeah, but they're supposed to be trained to use an adequate level of force to stop a situation, not step on some dude's fucking head for, what was it, 8 minutes and like 46 seconds or something? Or step on his neck? Or his neck, his back? Whatever it was. That's not what you're supposed to do. Or, like, and to what extent is this guy supposed to not struggle, right? Like, I actually haven't watched the whole George Floyd video, but I saw him just like laying there for the most part, not struggling, and they stayed the fuck on top of him. What if he kept struggling? Then what? They're justifying to continue doing that, but like by him not struggling, he's going to die. Your natural instinct when you can't breathe or you're being attacked by someone is to fight back. You can't just like obsequest, or I don't know, I'm using that word wrong. You can't just like give in to someone who's about to fucking kill you. It's not in your instinct to do it, and it requires a lot of effort to people who are panicking when they're being detained by the fucking police. There's an understandable level of hostility towards the fucking police that the police need to go there understanding they're going to receive and then react calmly to this. It is not a justification for the police to use excessive amounts of violence just because like, oh, well, you know, he was handing off some loose cigarettes, or like, you know, he tried passing a $20 bill during a pandemic where food was scarce. Like, get fucking real.
The incident is precipitated by the, quote, victim resisting and using violence against the police officer. Can that be irrelevant? Now,
So here's a fun fact. We'll use George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin as an example of this. So you can initiate violence on someone, and you can initiate an incident, and that doesn't mean you can't use self-defense. So in the case of George Zimmerman, I would say that the court found it correct, but like the whole situation is stupid, right? So George Zimmerman followed Trayvon Martin in a car. It seems like, based off the evidence, that George Zimmerman got out of the car, and then Trayvon Martin doubled back and confronted him, like, "Why you following me, you stupid fuck?" And then started beating the shit out of him. Now, we don't know if George Zimmerman threw the first punch, missed, and then just got the shit kicked out of him by Trayvon Martin. We have no fucking idea. We will never know that. And that's okay. We don't need to. Because while you can argue that George Zimmerman initiated that by following someone he shouldn't have been following, Trayvon Martin also punched him in the face first. Now, let's say hypothetically Trayvon Martin punched him in the face, but then George Zimmerman got on top of him and started slamming Trayvon Martin's head into the ground. Trayvon Martin would have been justified in, even though he threw the first punch, to using a gun to defend himself. And these are not people who are illegitimate. They don't have claims to self-defense just because the other person initiated it. Once you're allowed to use self-defense and you're allowed to use deadly force to defend yourself when the alternative is you dying. When you have someone who's running from the police, shooting a taser backwards, right? When there's two officers and probably one charge on a very inaccurate taser, right? We probably didn't need to use deadly force on this one. When you have someone like George Floyd who's on the fucking ground, and I'm pretty sure he's in handcuffs at that point, probably didn't need to keep using force. Your life isn't threatened. You don't need to keep using force. That is the crux of a self-defense thing, that you needed to use this force to protect yourself from fucking dying, okay? And just because you start a fight, right? Like, let's say, like, you're at a bar, you punch someone in the fucking face, and they, like, take out a fucking baseball bat, and they're going after you with a baseball bat, like, you just shove them, right? You just shove them, like, you're fucking dick, man. And they just take out, like, a baseball bat, like, out of their pocket, like, how the fuck did you fit that in there? And they start running at you with a baseball bat, going for the head, you know? And you pulled out a gun and shot them. That is justified self-defense. Even though you started it, you don't lose your right to self-defense. It's if you cannot defend yourself, if your life is threatened and you have and you can't retreat and they're not running away, right? But let's say he runs at you with a baseball bat, he hits you in the leg with a baseball bat, right? And he's like, "You fucking dick," and then he turns around, he walks away, and you shoot him in the back. You lost your right to self-defense because he's no longer attempting to kill you. Now, he could run at you with that baseball bat, and while he's running at you with that baseball bat, you don't know if he's just gonna, like, hit you in the leg, or if he's fucking with you and not gonna hit you at all, or if he's going for the headshot and gonna try and kill you. So you'd be justified in self-defense in that instance. But once he, like, either hits you a little bit or is running away, from you, maybe you pull out a gun and he's like, "Oh shit," and then he runs away. Once he starts retreating, you cannot shoot that person and claim self-defense because they're retreating and your life is no longer threatened. So what he's saying here is stupid. It doesn't matter if these black people started with the police because they committed a crime and the police had to respond. The police's force exists so far as their life feels threatened. When there's a black dude on the fucking ground who's being choked out and he's surrounded by multiple police officers who could pretty easily fucking control him, particularly when he's barely resisting or not resisting at all, guess what? That's not excessive use of force, 100%. Doesn't matter if they started the incident. It doesn't fucking matter. Because that ain't a claim to self-defense. That's fucking stupid.
Again, I want to emphasize, is the race of the person who resists arrest a relevant datum in assessing what's going on? So my bottom line on all of this is I feel like we're out of touch with reality. That we're really letting a kind of meta...
Someone here is definitely out of touch with reality. I don't think it's the people protesting. There's someone who's avoiding a whole lot of context and being purposely obtuse in order to avoid really fucking obvious problems with over-policing in black communities and our general militarization of police and our general way in which we train police. I remember I have a background in, like, criminology, and one of the textbooks I read that kind of blew my fucking mind. It was it Maria Haberman? I think it was a book by her. Man, that might be the wrong name. Whatever. It was a textbook though, and she's like, "Yeah, I review police trainings, and guess what they all had in common?" She's like, "I went through hundreds and hundreds of different departments, and this was a trend across all of them, that they have 80 hours of gun training, 20 hours of pit maneuver training, blah 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 blah, 1 hour of de-escalation training. So all of their training is on using force and using more force. And then like they kind of shoehorn in like an hour or two seminar, maybe like twice during the training about like, hey, try talking to them first. But like when that fails, just like, you know, shoot them in the fucking face, or, you know, throw them on the ground, put them to the floor, you know, do whatever. That's their whole shtick there, and it's like, yeah. And she's like, this is the thing in all police departments, they aren't trained in de-escalation. And let's be real, every single fucking incident the police are responding to isn't like the North Hollywood shootout where like the criminals here are armed with like armor piercing rounds and they're wearing body armor and like they need to come ready to fucking murder these people. It's, hey man, like, you pulled this person over and they were speeding a little bit, you don't gotta walk up to them and be a douchebag. Most people are gonna be like, yeah, my bad, I fucked up, you know. Or you go to like a domestic dispute or whatever, and most people are being chill. You don't need to start throwing someone on the ground, being a dickhead, and being like over the top with aggressive policing. But that's what they're trained to do. Like the whole warrior training thing is literally like, you know, you're the means to facilitate death, and that is your blah blah blah. Like this is the whole shtick of that. Like, just be over aggressive. Like, that is our job, and this is what we do. And they bring that into every single interaction because that is what their training emphasizes. At that point, it's literally systemic. You're training these people to be over aggressive, and they're over aggressive against both white and black people. Like the whole oh shit, what was his name? Shaver shooting. There's a guy in Arizona, Daniel Shaver. There we go. This one was fucked up, man. This dude, this was in a La Quinta Inn in Arizona, and this is the one who he was on the hallway, and they're like, cross your legs, put your hands behind your head, and like your stomach on the ground, and like crawl towards us like you're supposed to be like a worm, and like do it, and like if your hand touches anything. And this dude's like sobbing hysterically. This is like I think it's like over a 5-minute video of them like trying to get him to like go towards them, and his pants start falling down because these cops are dumb as fuck, and giving him like ridiculous directions that are impossible to follow, and his pants start falling down. So as he's going to the ground, he like reaches towards his pants, like instinctual, like pull my pants so my dick doesn't fall out. And they fucking just shoot this guy in the head like multiple times. Like they shoot him multiple times. He dies instantly. Just blew him the fuck away. He's a white dude, clearly. Let's look at this picture. It's 100% a white dude right there. Definitely white. Maybe a little Hispanic, but definitely like, hey, look at that guy. He's a fellow white guy. I'll indoctrinate him. You know, you're white now. Congratulations. But like, that's the thing. It affects, the police violence is systemic and affects everyone they come in contact with. But by virtue of where we choose to send our police, they come into more contact with black people, and there's also some white nationals in the police too, which probably doesn't help. Actually, definitely doesn't help, right? So we have like, yeah, there's a bit of racism in there, but also we choose to send them to black communities, and we train them to use violence. So you're putting all the tools there, and you're putting them in the situation where there's systemic racism. That's going to happen.
And a kind of meta-racialized moralism, which I don't think really is very deeply philosophically moral at all. Equity, equality, but defined moralism, which I don't. We're really letting a kind of meta politics and a kind of meta-racialized moralism, which I don't think really is very deeply philosophically moral at all. Equity, equality, but defined in terms of race.
Equality is not morally good.
We're letting that.
I assume he's just stuttering through that. I don't know what the fuck he's getting at. I mean, he's a libertarian. They're assholes, so maybe that's why. Well, I don't know. He's on a libertarian channel. I didn't actually think he was a libertarian.
That kind of thing drives us, and it troubles me very much about the intellectual political climate of the country at this moment.
So you in the same interview with City Journal, you said, I'm 72 years old.
I'm also very troubled by the intellectual climate of this country, because like people like him are getting interviews on like Reason and get like attention paid to them by half of our country because they're voicing a minority unsupported opinion outside, I shouldn't say completely outside his realm of expertise. I think he's like socioeconomics or something. Where the fuck is it? American economist, academic author. I know he's an economist, but I'm pretty sure it's some like weird social economics. Okay, so he probably has no excuse to be this fucking dumb.
And I know what things were like in the 1950s and 1960s. The United States has become a completely different country. Whites can lose their jobs today if they talk to blacks in the wrong tone. Institutions at all levels of government work full-time against racism. Every university and major corporation has a powerful executive position that monitors and strives for diversity and inclusion. Can you sketch a little bit about how things have changed over your lifetime? Your professional lifetime, you've been a professor since 1976.
Wow, we're gonna get like anecdote Andy and like survivorship bias here. This is gonna be really fun.
Are things better or worse for blacks in terms of kind of everyday material conditions?
So why would you ask him his personal experiences with this and then ask him to generalize his personal experiences to the overall experience of black people? What could you possibly fucking gain from that?
I think you'd have to say they're better. I think if you just looked at the baseline set of social indicators, educational attainment, penetration of certain kinds of occupations, family income, and so forth like that, certainly things are better, and they're relatively better, although they are not anywhere near parity as compared to the mid-50s. I mean, occupational structure, I think the modal occupation for employed black women in 1950 was domestic. I'm pretty sure that that's true.
I'm pretty sure it's true of both black women and white women, so I don't know why he's bringing that up. Like, women only started entering the workforce in mass in like the 60s and 70s or something? Like, peaking like the 80s? Sorry, not peaking, but like, started hitting its like asymptotic peak of just having like parity with employment in the labor force participation. There we go.
I think you had a minuscule number of people in the professions in medicine and law and in the academic and so on, and you could go down those indicators. I think, however, that if you were to look at other indicators like the stability of family life, like the degree of criminal violence, you might even find in terms of effective school performance, because there was really unequal educational provision to African American students. So whatever performance disparities might have existed in 1950, might have been accounted for by differential access to resources. Whereas today you get large performance gaps by race, even when you condition on resources, even when those resources are middle class.
So I'm gonna like anecdote Andy this here. So I went to a school district where we had like the best of everything. Like if you look up like rankings of high schools or something, my high school is like top 100 high school that I went to when I was a kid. Now my parents moved 10 minutes down the fucking road pretty much, and I went from one of the worst communities in the fucking one of the worst school districts in the country, where like they literally can't have people graduating high school in 5 years because 4 years. They had like 5-year high school program. Because they physically didn't have the resources to give people enough classes to fill out a schedule in 4 years. So they had to stretch it to 5 years. That's how bad this thing was, and it was 10 minutes down the road. That community, very largely African American. The one I moved to, 10 minutes down the road, very largely white, Asian. I think it was like probably like 80% white, and then like probably like 10 or 12% Asian after that. And then like 8% like Hispanic and black. Mostly Hispanic people. There's like, my high school I think was like 2,000 kids or something, and I want to say there's probably like a dozen black kids among them. Like, legitimately.
That's where affirmative action comes from.
But like, just saying like we reached like parity after like the Civil Rights Act and with like busing is like technically not correct. Busing had like the short-term effect, but I have to read more about this, but like from what I generally understand, we had further stratification of communities where there was like now more schools, and the schools were now funded by usually state tax. I'm pretty sure this is true across the board. Usually schools are funded by local taxes, which means that rich communities have rich public schools, poor communities have poor schools, have poor public schools. There we go. And that just perpetuates itself, because you can have teachers who are one teacher to a class of 40 versus like a teacher and like a TA to a class of like 20, 22 or 25, or lower. And maybe you'll have special education classes and remedial classes and a whole variety of classes with people who had different learning rates. When like in a lower income area, like we got one teacher to teach history, and like we're gonna throw you in that room, sink or swim, good luck, no extra help for you. So what he's saying is like wrong, because in certain ways, like yes, we got rid of like we implemented busing for a short time. We got rid of like separate but equal on paper anyway, but like we just ended up having like separate and unequal, but in different ways that weren't as direct. Like the whole Civil Rights Act went from having like overt racism in the form of Jim Crow laws to subvert racism, which requires you look at like necessarily effects. There's actually fuck it all. I'm not getting money off this video. Lee Atwater. If anyone's ever read a book on like discrimination or anything, you'll be probably pretty familiar with this quote. I debate if I want to read it or listen to it. I don't remember how good the audio is. It's a quick one. So this guy, his name's Lee Atwater. He's a Republican strategist for Reagan, and then he led the H.W. Bush campaign in 1988.
Statistician, all right, political. How I would approach that issue as a statistician, all right, political science. Or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not. is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this.
All right, I won't hear.
You start out.
So he was quoted on this, and we're hearing this recording. This was not released until like decades after he died. He died in like the early 90s. I think he had like, actually I think he had AIDS or something. I might be wrong on that. I feel like he died of like AIDS or some autoimmune disease related to that. And this was only released in like exclusively at 2012 is when this came out.
1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now. You're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And
so that's pretty much the.
Subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously, sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, nigger. You know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
So what he's talking about is basically elaborating on the Southern strategy that Nixon, Reagan, H.W. Bush, and pretty much every politician since then has used. Even Bill Clinton used racially coded like politics in order to like make himself look more centrist. Carter actually did too. Every president since most of our presidents have sucked, but as far as I know, pretty much every president since after JFK used racially coded, or no, I guess LBJ. Every president after LBJ used like racially coded language in order to propel themselves to the presidency. It's the essence of dog whistle politics. There's a really good book on it by Ian Haney Lopez Smith. Ian Haney Lopez. Yeah, Dog Whistle Politics. Really good book where it goes over how each one of those campaigns used racially coded language in order to like assuage like white concerns about shit. So the where the fuck goes it? There it is. So what he's saying here, he starts off by saying like, you know, I use like a statistician approach, or wait, this is the wrong one. He's like, I use like a statistician's approach, and you know, blah 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 blah. And the abstract is that white people end up getting hurt worse, or sorry, black people end up getting hurt worse than white people. That's the whole point of their coded language. It's that I can't say verbatim that this is a thing, you know, but I can create laws and I can craft laws in such a way that black people get fucked, and that is what we have done for decades. And once you put that in place, it gives you that we're going to say like, whoa, I am not saying something racist. I'm saying we should cut taxes. You know, everyone benefits from cutting taxes. A rising tide lifts all boats. But that's not how it works, right? When you do these things to defund poor communities, and you make it so that you have systemic effects that make black people worse off and more poor than whites, you can't just say, okay guys, discrimination over, we're all equal now, and ignore like 150, 200 plus years of like mass disenfranchisement. It doesn't work like that. It literally can't. Wealth like perpetuates itself, and poverty also perpetuates itself. And particularly when you have laws that are specifically targeting these fucking communities, as like the Nixon thing demonstrated, right? Like, yeah, I'm gonna make these things these things illegal and these things legal. I'm gonna criminalize these two things, give them harsh penalties, and then punish those people who fucking disagree with me. And then, as a fun fact relating to this, is we also made it so they can't vote. So like, you're almost back to like fucking Jim Crow again. We're like, oh, black people, well, you know, they're in prison at rates like 20 times higher than white people, and once they go to prison, we make it so they can't vote for life. Like, I live in Florida now, and we recently through a ballot initiative, because most people, like, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, if I explain to you a policy and I'm like, hey, when someone serves their time, should they be allowed to vote afterwards? Most people, Republican or Democrat, are going to say, hell yeah. But like Republican politicians, they're like, no. Like, we pay lip service to democracy, but we don't actually believe in democracy. So when they get into power, they're going to pass laws that disenfranchise felons, and they're going to make sure that most people who would politically disagree with them are the ones who are now felons, right? That's the whole fucking idea there. So in Florida, we passed a law through ballot initiatives. The great thing about every good thing that comes out of Florida is more or less done through ballot initiatives. Ballot initiatives, basically every time we have an election, you can get stuff put in a ballot, and it's just subject to like a mass vote. And if it gets 60+%, then that becomes part of our Constitution, and there's nothing the Republicans or the Democrats can do about that, apart from trying to get that constitutional amendment like repealed or something. Or I guess maybe they could. I'm pretty sure they can determine it. No, I guess they can't determine it unconstitutional. They'd have to make it like federally unconstitutional because our state judges determine it at a state constitutional level, and it's becoming part of the state constitution. Anywho, as a result of our ballot initiative in 2018. I think it's 1.2 or 1.5 million people were put back on our voting rolls. That's a lot of fucking people. Florida has like 22 million people. Let's see. Hold on, let's look this up real quick. Florida population. Florida. I am not getting through this whole fucking Glenn Loury video. God, what a dumbass. Yes, we have about 22 million people. Obviously, all those aren't adults. All of them aren't eligible to vote. That's the entire population. Among our voting population, which I'm sure I could look up if I was more so inclined, like 1.2 million, which is almost like, what's that? Probably close to like 8% of our voting population not allowed to vote. Most of those people are low income. Most of them are they're disproportionately low income, disproportionately a minority community, particularly black, which obviously lean towards voting Democrat. So they basically said like 1.2 million people couldn't vote, and then when we passed that amendment, they tried tacking on. I actually didn't know about this until they started trying to mess with it. They tried saying, okay, fine, these people can vote once they paid their debt to society. We now define their debt to society not just as their time in prison, but when they repay all fines associated with their incarceration. Now I interpret that as, okay, when I get sent to jail and when I get a penalty assessed against me, that I need to also pay that penalty associated. Like they say, okay, you get 2 years and like $2,000, 2 years in prison, and then $2,000 fine, right? I thought it was that, but it's not. In Florida, we charge people to incarcerate them. It's like $30-something a day that we charge people while they're incarcerated. So of course they get out of prison, and let's say you did 5 years in prison. Let's do some quick math on that. Oh, you guys won't be able to see my calculator, but let's see. We'll just say it's $32 times 365 times 2. That would put you at $23,360 for 2 years in prison at $32 a day. So you come out with like the down payment on a fucking house. Actually, you could buy some cheaper houses with that, but or like the entire value of like a mid-sized car in debt that you have to pay, and your prospects of employment are gone. So basically, they'd settle these poor people with tons of money, and like the Republicans tried to argue like, okay, like we now we can't say that you can't vote just because you were a felon, so we're going to extend that. And we're just going to say until you repay all this money, which was clearly not what the law intended to do. The law intended to enfranchise those people, even if they did owe money. But they tried saying like that's part of their penalty, so they can't do that. And that got ruled unconstitutional because like it's literally just a fucking poll tax at that point. You don't have enough money to vote, so you can't vote. That's what it became. So like we do this at a systemic level all over the place. With like at the top level, there's racial connotations. And at the bottom level, it's because it serves a dog whistle effect. It's meant so you don't hear it in terms of racialized language, but it has a racialized effect, and the racialized effect is intentional. But it gives people wiggle room to just play obtuse, like, oh, I didn't know that if we made heroin illegal, that if we targeted black communities, that then they'd all become they would make all black people felons, and then we make it so they can't vote again. Like, oh, but like. Yeah, that's obviously what happened, and that was done intentionally. This is like hardly controversial or hardly fucking. Man, I tend to get through 20 minutes of this fucking video. I've probably been ranting for like an hour.
I mean, I'm sorry. Am I being responsive to you, Nick? You asked me.
Yeah. No. Well, I guess.
How things have changed.
Yeah.
But here's the main thing that's changed over time is, I mean, think about the civil rights movement. I mean, those questions were really the legitimacy of the things that King and company were working for in the late 50s and the 1960s were in question. Everybody was not on the same page in terms of affirming the legitimacy of those claims. Everybody is on the same page now. King is a national holiday. I mean, it's not the same country. It's ridiculous.
Oh man, I was like, hey, he's actually got something right here. Where like people, and now you're like, oh, Martin Luther King, he was right, and people kind of like underscore like, hey, Martin Luther King was fucking hated. Lest we forget, he was assassinated. Okay.
Think of it as the same country. And if I may, I'd say I think these things are not unrelated. I think the fact that it's not the same country and that the underlying structures have moved much more in the direction of civil rights for African Americans, equal rights for African Americans, together with the fact that there are very substantial performance differences across a range of social indicators, including
Oh God, he's about to do the whole Murray thing. Okay, I'm gonna expand on this one last time, and then we'll deal with the Murray. Well, I'm not gonna go in depth on Murray because there's way too much to get in on that, but I'll make fun of Murray. But yeah, what he's saying is yes, we literally had laws on the books that said black people different schools than white people, black people different bathrooms, different water coolers, blah 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 blah, like all this shit that was directly meant to target black people. But like once we took those off the books, we just used things as an abstraction to target black people. We didn't stop. Be like, it wasn't like 1965. The racists were like, you know what? I guess we had a good run, guys. Let's stop being racist now. Like it didn't happen. Like the general mindset of most people was to not be as overtly racist, and it was kind of weird because like the mental state of sort of knows is like people have this notion of like not being racist and freedom, and they think of themselves as I'm not a racist, and I'm not a racist because I don't walk around a KKK hood and proclaim myself racist. Like racist is like an active thing that you have to think about, and you have to actively be racist, and you can't be racist unless you know you hate black people. But like racism isn't a binary; it's a sliding scale, and I think that's a really important thing for people to understand. That when I say like you're doing racism or you're being racist, people take it too personally, and like it is a very personal insult, I suppose, like in our society. But it's not like an irredeemable personality trait. It's like a hey, just stop doing the racism and we're fine, And like when you're doing racism, maybe it's not like on a scale of like it's not a yes or no. It's like it's like a 2 on the racism, right? Like if you tell me you just don't find like black people attractive, or you don't find white people attractive, or you don't find Asian people attractive, there's probably some baked in racism just to not finding people of a certain ethnic group attractive. There probably is something there, but on a scale of like racism, it's like a 1.25 or like a 2 out of 10. Very minor racism, probably not worth really dealing with. Really not a big deal. But if you're just like Mexicans come here, they're raping, they're raping and they're murdering and they're committing all these crimes. Now, spreading misinformation about the crime rates of different minority communities, or like 1350ing and shit, for the unaffiliated 1350 saying like, 13% of the population commits 50% of the crimes, or the fun extension of that of all 7%. So now it's just men of our population commit 50% of the crimes. That is like, it's like an 8 out of 10 racism. That's a big boy racism versus the little boy racism. And like those things are more worth dealing with. And like I'm not gonna go out of my way to like criticize someone for saying like they're unattracted to people of a certain ethnic group, like bigger fish to fry and all that. But yeah, yeah, that's racism. But the only thing you have to do is when I say, oh hey, like to explain these stats of differential African American crime or different black crime rates in this country, here are all these factors that explain it. If you go, oh okay, cool, I get it now. Then you move on, and you have now stopped doing the racism. That's all you gotta do. Stop doing the racism. And now you're no longer a racist doing racist things or saying racist things. You're just a guy who once had a view that was wrong, as many of us have in our lives, and it's okay. But yeah, he is a silly person.
Crime and violence and encounters with the police disadvantageous to African Americans, disfavoring African Americans. The combination of those two things, the opening of the society, basically, and the persisting underperformance and differential achievement across racial lines. That's what's creating, I think, this crisis.
So yeah, what I wanted to ask is if things, and I agree with you in virtually any possible way that you want to measure it, things are better for blacks now than they were,
No, like the destruction of their family units that he mentioned earlier, that was not a thing that happened until recently. The destruction of the black household has been caused in large part by mass disenfranchisement, mass incarceration, targeting these populations for criminality. Like, let's see, U.S. incarceration over time. It went from, over the course of like 30 years or something. There's a cool documentary if anyone's interested. A friend of mine linked it to me. Was oh shoot, I forgot the name of it. Oh no, it was like a Netflix documentary. I can't remember the name of it. Oh well, I'll find it later. I'll put it in the description. So look at this. Look at that steady crime rate. This is mostly following our population increase. Population's increasing, the amount of people incarcerated. Then for some reason, like, here's the Civil Rights Act right here, and then all of a sudden, Look at that. Look at that explode. And this is actually a little low here because this is state and federal prison populations. It's not counting jails. Jails are where you hold people for less than a year of time, usually during pre-sentencing, pre-detainment, and short jail sentences that are less than a year. When you add that in, it's over 2 million. It's over 2 million in 2017. I think it's like 2.2 million. So it's almost it's a little more than a 50% increase over this number that you see here. But yeah, like, this isn't coincidental that right after we did, like, the whole Civil Rights Act, that this started fucking exploding. It's not like our population just increased, like, I don't even know, 10 fucking fold. It didn't. It increased by, like, I don't know, like 40% or something after this point in time. But, like, this is what we fucking did. And here we are, U.S. #1 in rates of incarceration. Once again, not counting jails.
Or 50 years ago or 70 years ago. But we don't talk.
But, oh yeah, so my point there was, like, yeah, like, that whole destruction of, like, the family unit, the two-person income, was, like, a reflection of, like, this. It's not, like, a cultural thing that just, like, sort of happened. Like, oh, black people just hate their family. I was like, no, they had pretty close-knit communities. You had stuff like Black Wall Street, where, like, the black communities were, most people are probably familiar with Black Wall Street, but basically Black Wall Street was a very affluent, Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street is a very, like, affluent community in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that, you know, spoiler, Tulsa Race Massacre is what it is now known for, where, like, the entire place was just burned to the ground by, like, angry white people over some nonsense, and they just burned the rich black area to the ground.
Talk about things in those terms. Is there an inability of...
And that was during, like, Jim Crow and all that shit. It was in, like, 1921 in Oklahoma that they were able to build, like, a very affluent, like, basically like a black, like, enclave where they did well and helped each other out. And then, like, white people got mad, burned the fucking place to the ground, and killed, like, 200 plus or 150 plus people, according to this.
Discourse about kind of racism and inclusion and change that precludes the possibility of progress. That's one question, and then let's get to the question about how the differential outcomes for certain blacks, you know, kind of skews the conversation. But is it that we're incapable of talking about progress, about social progress?
That's an interesting way of putting it. I think I might agree with that if that were the claim. The claim is we're not really able to have an effective deliberation or discourse, and I think that's true. I suppose there could be theories about why it's true. I think there's a lot of dishonesty and a lot of kind of avoidance. I just want to say virtue signaling. There's a lot of moral posturing. There's a lot of, kind of branding. That it seems to me that, like, for example, this spate of corporations coming out for Black Lives Matter. You can't tell me they have a politics. They don't have a racial politics. It's just like the Super Bowl. You want to have your brand advanced by making a statement within a certain context. I think there's a lot of that. Sorry.
So is that
branding? That it's there's a lot.
Can I ask you, like, who?
I just want to say virtue signaling. There's a lot of moral posturing. There's a lot of kind of branding. That it seems to me that, like, for example, this spate of corporations coming out for Black Lives Matter. You can't tell me they have a politics. They don't have a racial politics. It's just like the Super Bowl. You want to have your brand advanced by making a statement within a certain context.
I actually agree with him on the pessimism of the whole reason corporations are supporting Black Lives Matter. Like, yeah, like, they don't genuinely care. Like, Nike doing the whole Colin Kaepernick, Nike sweatshop. Yeah, like, there we go. So, like, Nike coming out and, like, oh, Colin Kaepernick, like, black people, whatever. And then, like Nike doing that whole thing was literally just, like, Nike, like, hey, how can we monetize this? Because, like, Nike doesn't fucking care about, like, the well-being of impoverished communities. Like, they were known for the whole sweatshop thing. Nike strongly denied the claims in the past, just the company has little control over subcontracted factories. Oh yeah, little control. Like, the thing is, when you're like, oh, I'm getting these sneakers at, like, you're manufacturing my sneakers at 1/10 the price, and then you're just like, let's not ask why that's happening. Like, you fucking know when you go to a place that doesn't have labor regulations and you contract to a factory, you know the conditions are shit. Who are we fucking kidding? So I don't believe that, like, Nike purchases from a factory that relies on forced labor from Uyghurs. Oh, cool, they're still doing it. I didn't even know that. issued reports on working conditions in the Chinese Vietnamese factory complex and various violations of labor standards such as blah, blah, blah. Just allow the contract to expire. Oh, they allowed that one to expire. It's like they just go to another. They're like, oh, let's go find different pseudo-slave labor. You know, like it's ridiculous. She knew agreement with Georgetown University, which granted the full access to Nike's factories. And here in 2020, they were found Uyghurs are the Muslims that China is basically genociding. So that's cool, man. So yeah, basically, like Nike's like, let's go score some social points in America and let's do this. So yeah, I agree with him. Like, yeah, this is just like calculated advertising. Like, let's invest like $1 million into this and say like Black Lives Matter. And they're like, how much money can we get for saying Black Lives Matter? It's very cynical, okay? Like, it's nonsense. Well, yeah, it's like, yeah, Nike's there saying like, oh, you know, police violence is bad. Meanwhile, they're getting like slave labor from fucking Uyghurs in China. Like, okay, man. Like, yeah, Glenn Loury, I fucking agree with you here. It is just cynical nonsense.
I think there's a lot of that. Sorry.
So is that I mean, is that what you mean when you say dishonesty? It's certainly virtue signaling, but I mean, are people who are saying that you know, the country is worse now? And I'm thinking it could be somebody like Al Sharpton, but there are wide numbers of white people, of white spokesmen.
I will clarify that I don't think the common complaint is that America is worse now than it was during slavery. I think the argument is that like. It oddly enough, it's harder now, right? Because like it exists in that dog whistly way, where like, how do you say that like a given tax policy is racist? You know, because like it's not just saying black people need to pay twice the tax rate. It's saying like, oh, like here's what we're gonna do, and then as a result, black people get fucked worse than white people. Like that's the effect of the policy, and it's harder now because like people can just pretend that it's not racist because it doesn't specifically outline like race in the passing of a law or the implementation of a policy. So racism is harder to discuss now because it has that abstraction, but we can't deny like the outcomes that result from these racist institutions. And like we have plenty of studies that show like, yeah, we have like systemic racial problems like that target black people, right? There are studies about juries who when given the same fact pattern overly convict black people over white people, or like that one I said before about how doctors don't treat doctors don't give as many painkillers or medicines to black people as they do white people, etc. You can go down the list of all these different ways, like, or the whole like name study, right? Like, if you send the same resume and it's like, are Jamal and I think it's like LaQuisha. Fuck, I don't remember. I think I might be equally employable. I'm trying to remember the study. Are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal? Okay, I remembered it right. Cool, I'm not a racist. Yeah, basically the gist of this was like, yeah, but we just give them the same resume and we apply for jobs. Like, there's a drastic difference in callback ratios between Jamal and Lakeisha and Emily and Greg, even with the same exact qualifications. Really, really interesting study than that one.
Or, you know, if that even makes sense, who will say that, you know, this country has an irremediable race problem and that things are as bad now as they've ever been. I mean, they're just being dishonest, or do they...
Once again, you are being dishonest right here, because that's usually not the statement that it's worse than it's ever been. It's like, it's still bad, and it's still pretty bad, and it's differently bad. It's probably not as directly bad as chattel fucking slavery, and to act like someone like me, or like any sort of like Black Lives Matter supporter is saying like, this is worse than chattel slavery. Like, no, it's different, and it's like more like insipid. Like, it's more like covertly toxic than like chattel slavery, because like when you're beating the shit out of slaves to where they're like bloody corpses are being like hung in like the town square, you know, it's not too hard to like, well, I guess I say that from our vantage point now, but like you could pretty much see how like that is a little less like all you kind of got to do is convince people like, hey, I think black people are human, and then like when you see like humans just being like flogged and like ripped up, like drawn and quartered or something, or however they used to decide to punish their slaves for being disobedient, then yeah, it's probably easier to like oppose that, you know. But yeah, it's
actually
this is so fucking disingenuous.
They're being dishonest. Come on, of course they're being dishonest. Oh.
Yes. The straw man you have set up is being incredibly dishonest about this being as bad as chattel slavery. Now, if I can find one, let's try and see. Modern black experience worse than chattel slavery. Let's see. Can we find something? Legacy of trauma. No, that's the context of their experience. Slavery aren't enough. Okay. I don't know. I mean, I tried finding someone. I figured you could at least find a Medium article of someone arguing that the modern thing is worse than chattel slavery. And even if you could find someone arguing that, I would say like the conditions make it harder to argue against the modern black experience than chattel slavery. That's not saying the experiences are worse, but that the nature of the oppression is harder to argue against because of how like layered and coded it is.
Of course, they're being.
But like, I don't know what they're fucking arguing about here.
I don't know what they're talking about. Look around the world. I mean, history wasn't bad. Of course, there was slavery. I mean, there's no denying that there was a race and is a race phenomenon within the context of American history. But this is an open society. African Americans are the richest and most powerful people of African descent on the planet. There's nothing that's not possible for my son to dream of. People are clamoring to try.
I somehow feel if I looked this up, that wouldn't be true. I'm guessing that if I looked up the average wealth of like African Americans versus like British Africans or black British people, that black British people probably do better. And I'm sure if I can look up like black Canadians, they probably also do better. But there's just like what's it, like 13% of our population is black. I think Canada and the UK have like 3 to 6% black populations, much lower than the United States because they did less of the slavery, which is a major way black people came to this country. But yeah, like this is stupid. Like sure, when you talk about like he's comparing that like this is such a stupid fucking argument, and it's one of those ones where it's so stupid. There's so many fucking layers to that. It hurts. So one, it's probably like even what he just said is wrong. Let's see, average wealth of black people across OECD nations. Let's try it. This is gonna be a hard one to try and look up on the fly. He could be correct, but I very much doubt he is because you still have black people in places like the UK and Canada who are OECD Western countries who probably on average perform better than black people in white country in the United States. But like whatever. He's probably literally wrong about that. But the point being that he's also trying to like compare it to like look at those poor blacks in Africa, is what he's sort of doing here. And it's like, yeah, they are poor, but like that's also ignoring the historical context of like colonialization and like violence in the African continent for the last like 100 years, where like most of the industrialization has occurred. And I'm not gonna say the guns, germs, and steel argument is like totally the like the end all be all of that, but basically guns, germs, steel argued that it's a famous book from like I think the 90s or maybe the late 80s or something. That argued that like Europe did better because like we had horses that basically like we had a lot more domesticatable species that allowed us to like create societies that allowed us to put more effort into like education and just staying in the same spot instead of being like hunter gatherer. I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but like yeah, when most of the industrialization happened in the past like 100 years or so, and like Africa sort of got left out of that because we used like the innovations of like gunpowder to like go to these places and like murder them and steal all their shit, then like yeah it's gonna make it so they're probably not at parity with you know Western countries.
To get inside of the United States, we have birthright citizenship here. I don't know what people are talking about. The fact of enslavement, now more than a century and a half in the past, is only loosely related. It's a social construction, the way that people have tried to make this connection.
Okay, he's a fucking moron. I think I was talking about in the beginning. Basically, yeah, saying slavery ended 150 years ago is stupid as hell because like there clearly was Jim Crow after that, which we need the Civil Rights Act to try and fix. And after that, that's when it became more coded. But to try and like say like slavery ended 150 years ago just kind of makes your argument sound a little better because hey, 150 years ago is a long time ago. You know what's not that long ago? 1964, because both my parents are older than the Civil Rights Act. Okay, which means that my parents grew up during an era where like people that they knew lived in like as second-class citizens who couldn't vote and couldn't do all this other shit.
You know, irredeemably racist. Yeah, we're in the freest, most prosperous.
Hold on, this is going to be really, really fun.
Greatest potential for the remedy of any particular problem.
Okay, so you said freest. Let's see. Let's do the Cato Freedom Index. Let's do it. Cato. I love libertarians, man. Cato Freedom Index. Let's see. This is the 2019 Cato Freedom Index, where they use like a whole bunch of random metrics to try and say who the most free is. Come on, give me the button. Where's the button at? Is this the end all be all? No, but like you'll see that like the U.S. isn't topping anything, and it's not even as an aggregate is it the most free. Come on, give me the ranking. Where you at, bitch? Fucking Christ. So once again, Cato's a libertarian think tank. So this is a libertarian think tank debunking this dude's stupid point here. Ranking. Okay. Come on. What the fuck? Why is my control F not working? Oh. Come on. We had it there for a second. We had it. Come on. Oh god, there's so many. Hold on. Come on, give me the United States. Let's put too much effort into this. Oh, here it is. There we go. So United States ranks number 15 here. Personal freedom. Economic freedom is even lower. So your capacity to escape nonsense is lower than all these other places. And then a whole bunch of places. And our personal freedoms, which is like our free speech and all that, tends to be high, but still isn't even the highest. Like Estonia crushes us in the personal freedom. Like, oh, New Zealand. You know that place that just had like an entire rugby match, like full capacity because they defeated coronavirus in like record time, and it can now go back to having normal lives. Yeah, they're doing pretty good. Most free country. But yeah, like this whole like ooh hoorah like American accept. Like, listen, I would love America to be the most free place on earth, but I can't will that into existence. You know, like it's kind of a title you gotta earn, and like even libertarians don't think it's the most free country on earth, so I can live with that.
Most kind of responsive to look what's happened on the gay rights thing. I know that's not race, but I mean, this is not a stultified, closed, inflexible, domineering society. This is a dynamic and open, morally reflective, and I think.
Man, I sure hope they recorded this before Trump said like, let's block Trump. Gays can't adopt. Let's see. Is it trans? Should be able to reject gay couples. Let's see. Okay, so they have no excuse. This was like 20 fucking days ago before they posted this fucking video. This was posted on the 24th. It's the 26th. And Trump was like, gays shouldn't adopt 20 fucking days ago that they argued to the Supreme Court. Fucking fantastic.
At the end of the day,
like, yes, we've made progress. Pretend there's not like a group with significant power pushing to disenfranchise gay people. The group he's saying, oh, look how much better they're doing, is just kind of laughable.
Virtuous society, and I would say compared to what? I don't know what people are talking about.
So you have
it's virtuous compared to the ideals we put forth.
But there are differential
that's where we're
outcomes,
failing
for among blacks and whites. In the past, you've written, and this was a critique of the bell curve and of people like James Q. Wilson, who I want to talk about Wilson a little bit later in more detail. But you were saying that it is not a sign of, I mean, you don't believe in racial essentialism, that there is something, irreducible in blacks or whites, and whites is a category that changes as frequently in its definition as blacks do. What go?
Hey, they're right about this. Actually, no, that's not true. I don't think the black definition really changes. It's more like not white, or what is white changes, and then what's black exists just solely in relation to like who we allow to be white, sort of. Well, and I guess you kind of gotta be dark to be black. I don't know. But yeah, like they're sort of capturing that well enough.
Goes into explaining the different outcomes, and then how does that come back to put discourse about individual flourishing or not in America?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've been thinking about since my dissertation, which was written under the guidance of Robert Solow, the great Robert Solow, at MIT. He was a growth theorist. I mean, he had made his own very substantial reputation, resulting in the Nobel Prize, and modeling, the dynamic of the accumulation of capital via the market where people are saving for the future, and then the funds underwrite investments that firms are making, and the population is growing. And so how does this kind of arc of economic evolution, of economic growth in its foundation? And my dissertation, sorry, but you did ask. I'll be brief.
Yeah.
My dissertation tried to apply some of the same conceptual framework for intertemporal decision making and the structure of markets and investments and production functions and things of this kind, but to the transgenerational transfer of economic status through parents investing in their kids. and through seeing the populations evolving over time, say black and white, toward more or less equality as the individuals within them became more or less effective economic agents, et cetera. So I've been thinking about this for a very long time. I mean, I would say you've got a number of things here, and I wouldn't necessarily leave genetics out if I were going to speak as a scientist. Although I think if I were to speak as a practical person, I not want to go there. I mean, I think a lot of those are open questions. I've read Charles Murray's book, the most recent one, Human Diversity, where he examines foundational and biogenetic differences between human populations, whether by gender or by ancestral descent, which is his substitute for race.
And class, yeah.
By social class, yeah, I know it's very provocative. We're not. I know that's not what we're talking about here, but I just want to say you can't rule all those questions out a priori. That's anti-scientific. That's anti-reason. You can't rule those questions out.
Okay, I actually want to address this. I don't think it's one of those things being technically wrong versus being practically wrong. Okay, so technically, he could be right. There could be some sort of genetic explanation for an IQ difference in ethnicities would probably be more accurate than just saying race, because like race is sort of just like an observed construct, right? And like, you'd have to somehow tie like dark pigment to like having low IQs or something weird like that. I don't know exactly how you'd pull that one off, but could there technically be something there? Yeah, and from my understanding, there's no evidence to support that we've found any sort of link. It's just postulated, and it's a thing that's postulated by people who are looking for stuff to reaffirm their racist beliefs, right? I think black people can't do as well as white people, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to put money into social safety nets because black people they're not capable of doing as well as white people. If you're looking to work backwards from your conclusion, that's a great way for a libertarian to justify the dismantling of a welfare state. So like, okay, there's something innate to these people that makes them incapable of like doing as well as white people, and that the pursuit of trying to attain like egalitarianism is in and of itself a foolhardy errand, because we can never get there because these people are like genetically not able to. It makes it so you don't have to do any work because you're lazy. Or because like you're ideologically opposed to it, right? Like the way I kind of like summarize libertarianism, it's a great ideology if you want to like entrench the systemic advantage that any group in a given society has, right? Just go full bore libertarianism, because like whatever your your current status is, like that's what's going to be perpetuated underneath like libertarian policies, like defund welfare states, blah blah blah. Like if you're rich, like fuck yeah, man, I got to pay less taxes. I can still send my kid wherever the fuck I want to school. It'll be great. If you're poor, well fuck you. We're gonna get rid of high school. Like. These people just get screwed. So what he said is technically correct. The reason I think it's practically incorrect is because the race and IQ question is never invoked in a non-scientific avenue, and even in like scientific research avenue, I just want more information. It's a Pandora's box sort of question, because like if you could answer it, what would you even get out of answering this question, right? And personally, I think like you wouldn't really get anything, right? Like, do we live in a world where if I found that there's like a 10%, like let's just go extreme. Let's say there's a one standard deviation difference between like the capability of black and white people. Let's pretend we have that. Then what? Do we kill all the black people? Do we just like put them in separate schools? What then? So what's the point of answering the question if we have no practical ability to do anything with it? It's dumb. It's like saying like, okay, it's like doing research on if we can use all the resources in the world to, I don't know, build a planet-sized Mickey Mouse. I don't fucking know, man. Like if we could do something, why answer that question if like there's no value of answering the question? I'm never going to try and build a planet-sized Mickey Mouse, so why do I need to know if all these resources could be done to elicit that effect? Like, there's no point. This is terrible. That was a terrible metaphor. This is a horrible metaphor. The worst of metaphors. But, like, there's no point in really answering the question. And in practice, because of the society we live in, the attempts to answer that question are always rooted in reaffirming systemic bigotry. It always is. Oh, like Murray's a great fucking example. Murray, before he even wrote the fucking Bell Curve, was like known for writing books critical of the welfare state, being a fucking jackass like that, So the bell curve just existed as him trying to prove a point, working backwards from his conclusion of how having a welfare state to try and help black people is a waste of time because they're probably not capable of doing it. Like, it's crazy. Like, I've read parts of the bell curve, never read the whole thing. There's a great video by I think it's Sean, like debunking parts of the bell curve. He uses some like really shoddy evidence, and the thing is, like, you have evidence and you have your moral axioms, and then from your moral axioms and your evidence you draw conclusions. Now, you could say like Hispanics commit more crimes than, or I mean, that wouldn't be, I don't want to use an accurate one. Okay, let's say black people commit more crimes than white people, right? You could say this as a factual statement. I would agree with that. I study criminology. True, they do. Now, the crux is in why and what we do with it. You can't just say that and then say, let's kill all the black people, because, hold on, that doesn't seem too right, and it's missing some important context, and I think that outcome would be pretty immoral, right? The bell curve functionally takes some very, very loose, flimsy data and makes sweeping, generalizable policy, suggestions on what we should do with this really, really flimsy evidence. Like, oh, we had a meta-analysis by a super racist dude not meta-analysis, sorry, multiple studies by like this guy who worked for white nationalist things, who looked at I'm thinking of a specific thing that I read in the book, and I'm a little iffy on it right now, but basically he cherry-picked some studies from this guy who was like known to work with like white nationalist groups who did IQ tests in like Africa or something, and did on these like weird like pygmy tribes who were like illiterate, and then like they couldn't understand the test, and like they're like, what are you doing, why are you talking to me? It's like pretty much, and it was like a very, very small group of studies with very low participation rates. And he goes, and their average IQ it was like their average IQ based off that was 70, and the black average IQ is 90. And that's the difference between like being in Africa and being here. We increase their ability, but like they're still limited. And it's like, wait, what? You can't make that like, you're trying to like, baked into that question is that like the society we live in America is equal towards blacks, debatable. Because like they're in this first world, that like that's a reflection of their peak potential. Once again, like debatable, and that these tests of like Africans that he did were like generalizable to like the continent of Africa, which has like 1.1 billion people in it or something, you know, versus like this small area that did the test. Like, it was just crazy. And then he's like, and because of that, like, we need to dismantle the welfare state. And it's like, what the fuck? Holy leaping leaps, Batman. Like, it actually fucking insane. But that was the entire thing Charles Murray did. Like, I want to defund the welfare state. Let's come up with some reason that makes it okay to defund the welfare state. And he goes, let's just say, like, hey, it's helping black people. Like, fuck it, we can't help them. They're genetically stupid. Move on, you know? Like, that's his whole shtick. Like, their bell curve, it's shifted, like, one fucking standard deviation over the left, you know? But yeah, so I view it as, like, a Pandora's box because, like, we as a society right now, we're not really capable of answering that question in a meaningful way. And even if we did, like, what would you do with that information? Create separate schools, separate but unequal, you know, because they're unequal as people. Okay, gonna execute them all? Gonna like sterilize black people? Like, what are you going to do with that information? So like, is it technically like anti-science to say like it's pointless in answering this question? No, like we employ science to try and like answer questions that meaningfully improve our existence. That question doesn't really help or meaningfully improve like the human experience. Like, why do we really need to answer it? And if we can answer it, like, what do we do with that information? And the answer is like really nothing. It's just a way for like the white nationalists to try and like justify like their bigotry. Because like, for example, it's funny because I know like I think it was like Sam Stu, the Majority Report, sort of like quote sniped Sam Harris on this when he was interviewed with like Ezra Klein, where he's like, well, what about what we found out that like white people have like 2% Neanderthal DNA and black people don't? And his point, Sam Stu's point, I think, was actually correct on this when talking about like the bell curve and whatever, where once again he's focusing on like the petty like scientificness, and it's like, well, what if, imagine if we found out black people had like 2% Neanderthal DNA? People would be like, oh, see, that's why they're stupid, because like they're not full-blown humans and Neanderthals were stupid, so here we are. Like, that's what you would have gotten. But because we found out white people had Neanderthal DNA, we just went, whatever, fuck it, you know, whatever, they got Neanderthal DNA, who cares? Next reason. But that's the thing, they're just looking for a reason. If you found out that black people had 2% Neanderthal DNA, people would be going nuts about like, well, see, they're not fully human, they're fucking they're they're interracial, no, they're partially interspecies, and that's the source of their low IQ. But you don't have that conversation because it doesn't serve the agenda of the people of the hegemonic powers in the Western fucking world, or like in the United States. So you don't talk about that. But that's the whole fucking point. Like, this isn't some like, virtuous guide of research. It's having an agenda, trying to reaffirm that agenda using scientific language and research that like has an agenda that it's attempting to fulfill in any single case. Like that's what they're doing. And the research is shoddy on it anyway. So like whatever. It's just really dumb. So like I would say like there's no point in really answering the question. What are we going to do with it? And inside our society, by attempting to answer that question, it's the entire history of America is like when we created the IQ test, it was to test people for like severe mental disabilities. And it didn't take too long until the IQ test was reapportioned to like try and to serve like a eugenicist end. Like that's how we initially got rid of that tool, to like initially bastardize that tool to try and help people with severe mental disabilities, was to like, okay guys, let's justify treating black people like shit. And like that's where eugenicism initially like came from, like scientific like racism.
Certainly it's possible in principle that there could,
and he's technically correct here, but it's like when you look at it in a sociological context, that's where it becomes like irresponsible and stupid for most people to talk about it while also being very dishonest. Like any sort of race IQ evidence is very, very flimsy, and you can't use that very flimsy evidence to make sweeping arguments against like affirmative action or welfare state or any of this shit. It's just trying to justify like the status quo is all it does.
How many, how big, and how would they work, and what consequence, and what remedy? I mean, I think the discourse about intrinsic differences, if it only turns on the existential question, on the question whether or not such differences exist, it's a fool's errand to try to stop that question.
It's a fool's errand to ask that question due to our context, is more or less what I was getting at. Like, he said it's a fool's errand to try and stop that question. Like, no, it's because, like, what do you do with that information? The answer is, like, nothing.
But the question is about how much significance should be given, and moreover, and perhaps more importantly, what are the interventions that could mitigate or make much less significant whatever these, I mean, like eyeglass correcting vision, et cetera, et cetera.
So yeah, but what's the social equivalent of eyeglasses? I'm wearing contacts, you're wearing glasses. We both would be dead, a couple of centuries ago. What's the equivalent of that in contemporary American life, so that people who grow up poor don't end up passing on a poorer life to their children, who then pass it on?
Yeah, I'm hard pressed to say it since I'm not Charles Murray. I'm not going to try to defend. I'm not going to try to defend.
Oh yeah, no, but in an American context, one of the things that is stunning is that whatever we might say about the income.
So I'll grant him that I don't think his extrapolations on the bell curve were as outrageous as the comment section made me see it was. How dare you represent reason in time of crisis? Blah blah blah. I fucking hate these fucking people. God, I hate all these people.
Gaps between whites and blacks and Asian Americans, and you can break it down into more discrete ethnic groups. The wealth gap, what gets inherited, is even larger. So, what goes into talking about differential outcomes of groups, or is that the wrong way to be looking at it?
No, I don't think, for the practical purpose of what we're trying to talk about here, which is this moment that we're in of crisis and agitation, that it's a waste of time to talk about groups and about group differences. And I had, merely mentioned in passing about the natural differences or the genetic stuff, because I mainly want to focus on, as I said, capital, and financial and human and social capital, connectivity. What does the network look like? What does the community look like? I tried to elaborate this a little bit. I did an essay for the Manhattan Institute a year or two ago on persistent racial inequality, and I say, look, let's talk about human development.
I actually thought of a metaphor for it. I'm gonna go for it. Okay, it's like arguing like, well, technically, if I gave my 3-year-old like my rigid 18-volt power tools, I gave him my table saw. Well, I don't actually have a kid, but like if I had a kid and I gave my 3-year-old my power tools, my fucking hammer drill, I gave him my fucking table saw. I'm like, here, have fun, man. Now there's a good chance he could not hurt himself with that. But there's also there's a chance like he could not hurt himself with that. But like, if we're being honest, given the context of how dumb 3-year-olds are, yes, technically he's most likely going to fucking hurt himself, and there's no way he's going to, like, it's very improbable he's going to do anything productive with that information, or with those power tools. Like, maybe if I give my 3-year-old like all my power tools and I say, hey, build this piece of IKEA furniture, there's a non-zero chance that I could leave the house for 2 hours and come back, and my 3-year-old will have built this piece of IKEA furniture, you know. But there's also a 90% chance that I'm going to come back to like a bloodied up like 3-year-old who's either dead or dead, maimed, or like dismembered. Okay, like that is what I'm going to come back to most likely. And what they're technically arguing is that, like, yeah, you know, like technically, you know, this isn't a like scientific pursuit that, like, yeah, and my 3-year-old could technically, like, physically, he would be capable of like building an IKEA thing if like he knew how to use these tools properly. But we as a society don't know how to use these tools properly and don't know how to use that information properly, so we're just going to use it to justify genocide. Like, that's what's going to happen. The metaphor worked out better than I thought it would.
You know, because that's basically what we're talking about, whether we're talking about behavioral problems that manifest in, you know, incarceration or academic achievement or whatever, or we're talking about development. We're talking about how individuals acquire the traits that are going to be valued in the marketplace and that are going to allow them to be effective in life, to be good citizens and neighbors and parents and all of that. And the disparities that we're seeing, I want to say, and this is, you know, extremely controversial, I think are a reflection basically of disparities in the development of these respective populations categorized by race. I don't think it can possibly be irrelevant that the majority of kids born to a black woman are born to a woman without a husband. I don't know the answer to all these social psychological questions, but the possibility that aberrant behavior among male adolescents might have some functional connection to father absence, how can you rule that out?
He just did it. He is now a proud supporter of Black Lives Matter. He fucking gets it, man. When you have a 1-parent household instead of a 2-parent household, that's gonna fuck with you. And that is what our racist criminal justice system has done. We came full circle. He did it. He got there. I mean, I'm sure he didn't actually get there, but like he literally just, yeah. Having half the resources in a household and like seeing what's causing that, great fucking example. And you could look at our criminal justice system as a great example of like how like we have destroyed the black families. Not the welfare state, which if I had to put fucking money on it, he's gonna go into how the welfare state destroyed these black communities.
The violence, it's something, the level of violence, you telling me that has no cultural component? I don't believe you. Okay? We just don't want to go there.
It does, and that's a culture that's built within the context of mass incarceration and a drug war that makes these people, or makes black people, unemployable in our marketplace because, like, 1, we don't give them the tools to have like an education that makes them productive. 2, once you go to jail, you go to prison for like pretty much any amount of time for a felony, then like now it's hard for you to get a job at fucking McDonald's. So we give them, the opportunities we give them would be low income opportunities, and I think it's like I can't remember what this was. I think it might have been the documentary I was thinking of. But basically, like, if you went to prison, your lifetime income is decreased by like half or something. Like, it's a crazy amount of money you lose just by getting like a 1-year felony sentence because you're fucked. And then you can go into like some sociological theories that explain this. Explain the criminality. One I tend to be a fan of is social. Oh man, my brain don't work so good right now. I've watched too much stupid. 19 minutes of stupid and my brain's melting. I keep wanting to say deterrence theory because I was arguing with someone about deterrence theory. It's not. It's strain theories. It's strain theories. There we go. Hoof. Strain theories. So strain theories are basically like there's a really cool one I read that one day maybe I'll make like an entire video on it because I thought it was really, really cool the way they analyzed this problem. It's a very modern paper. I think it's from like the late 90s or something, talking about this school of like was it Agnew? I don't think it was Agnew, but the basics of strain theory are that it actually relates a lot to like the American Dream. At least like the first incantation by Merton relates to like the American Dream, and we feel strain in which to achieve things in society. In his case, he talks about the American dream, how we want to achieve the American dream, and our inability to achieve the American dream causes us strain, causes us stress, and that as a response to strain or stress, that we do things to try and alleviate that, right? So if I know I need to make money, then I need to achieve like the American dream, and I'm experiencing stress for that. I can either get a job and make money, or I can steal from people and make money, right? Like, or sell drugs and make money, right? There's plenty of avenues in which you can achieve that. But if I cut off the legitimate avenues, like going to college or getting a job or starting a business, if I make those things unattainable, then the only attainable ways in which to alleviate that strain become criminal, right? You don't need to go to college to sell drugs on a street corner. And selling drugs on a street corner makes you a lot of money. So if you value achieving that American dream, achieving financial independence, then and you can't do it through legitimate means, then you're going to do it through illegitimate means. Really, really cool way to like analyze criminology. So like his explanation here is like, yes, but this culture is created from systems that make it very hard. I shouldn't say impossible. That make it statistically very difficult for people who come from impoverished backgrounds to achieve in society. That's what it fucking does. I kind of want to end on that note, actually, because I was only going to do like another 40 seconds. But yeah, like, I don't know. This is about as dumb as I thought. I can't believe I almost did. I almost watched this by myself to like be prepared. Like, none of these talking points were fucking interesting. What do we go through? Went through like generalizations about how people characterize Floyd, how like, oh, like they're just pointing to little things. Like, yeah, but it's always like these things act as like symbols. What's the term I want to use? Like a totem. I think totem. Totem is the word I want to use. Yeah, totem is a great word for this. Basically they act as like a totem, or like for people to get behind it. They're like the symbol that people can rally behind for larger systemic problems. Like the Michael Brown thing is a great example. Michael Brown was just the person who died who, developed a narrative that people could get behind. Now, the narrative wasn't incorrect about police abusing people in Ferguson, Missouri. That narrative was factually correct, which was confirmed by the DOJ report, who said, like, hey, yo, they've been being really fucked up to black people in Ferguson. It was confirmed by that, right? But, like, Michael Brown was just a vehicle to enact that change. And that change was enacted, even though Michael Brown kind of deserves to get shot based off the circumstances. So I do want to elaborate on that a little bit because it's kind of not like entirely accurate. So the guy had to shoot Michael Brown because that officer, apparently in that department, had the right to choose not to carry fucking tasers. So you have the less lethal taser and you have a handgun. He thought it was uncomfortable to wear a taser, so he never carried around a taser. So when Michael Brown ran from him and he pursued Michael Brown, when Michael Brown turned and charged towards him when he told him to stop, he shot Michael Brown with a gun because he didn't have a fucking taser. He also, I don't think, waited for backup or didn't have backup or something. I feel like he had backup that was further away, but he chose to pursue instead for, like, the strong arm robbery or whatever. But when that guy's charging at him and is, like, a physical threat, he's justified using that force. So, like, legally speaking, yes, he should not have been charged. He should have gotten away with it. Same thing with George Zimmerman, where it's like, yeah, like, technically, based off our laws, he shouldn't have been convicted of like that crime. He did legally use self-defense, but like the whole like I see a black guy in my neighborhood and I don't think black people should be in my neighborhood, so let me go harass this black person, follow him around with a car, that led to that interaction is highly inappropriate, even though it's not illegal, right? So you could look at this like from a sociological standpoint and say like, hey, the systems that led to that happening are fucked up. But like that thing in a vacuum wasn't necessarily wrong, and that conclusion might have been correct. But the systemic issues they were drawing to are real, tangible, and something that needs to be addressed. And they just happen to latch onto these symbols. Now, the George Floyd's a great one because while they're attempting to impeach him, impeach his character, it seems to largely be failing. Because, like, I don't care if he did, like, fucking drugs at some point in his life. I don't care if he tried to pass a counterfeit 20. Why did you stand on this guy's neck for 9 fucking minutes until he died? Like, that ain't that hard to understand. Most people, I'm pretty sure, you just need to watch the fucking video and you'll just fucking get it. Like, hey, that was fucked up. Eric Garner was a similar one. Eric Garner and Michael Brown happened at a similar time. And the Eric Garner one was like, yeah, you didn't need to do that. The guy was like agitated. He was arguing with the police or whatever. all you gotta do is talk to him for a little bit and like talk him down. It's like, hey man, we're just trying to talk, like chill out, dude. But the cop instead chose to go behind him, put him in a chokehold, take him to the ground because like he was like, why are you guys hassling me? Like I was just breaking up a fight and you're fucking with me here. Like why are you guys constantly fucking with me? Like he was annoyed because guess what? The police fucked with him a lot for selling loose cigarettes. Who gives a shit? It's loose fucking cigarettes. Fuck you. It's not really that big of a deal. But it was big enough a deal for like, what was it, like 6 officers to get around him. One guy sneaking up from behind, puts him in a fucking chokehold, takes him on the ground, and then while he's struggling, saying he can't breathe, you let him die. Like that's the world we live in. And then like, I feel like that was towards the tail end of like, what was it, stop and frisk too. So I wouldn't be surprised if like some of his previous stops were some of the previous stops he had for selling loose cigarettes were probably a result of stop and frisk policies that's implemented in New York City, which includes Staten Island for some god unknown reason. But like, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if like some of those reasons he was stopped and busted or harassed for selling loose cigarettes come from stop and frisk, which was overly targeting intentionally, according to Mayor Michael Bloomberg, black and brown communities. Very simple. All right, we're gonna end it here. I don't know if I can handle doing 40 minutes of this. Maybe I'll make some more later, but there's some other videos I kind of want to make, so we'll end it there.